The year was 2347, and humanity had finally earned its place among the stars. After decades of hard work and countless sacrifices, Earth had proven itself worthy of a seat at the Galactic Council. It was not an easy journey. Many alien races had looked down upon humans for their short history and simple technology, but humans were patient. They learned, they adapted, and slowly they earned respect. Commander Jake stood at the window of his small cabin aboard the transport ship. He watched the stars pass by like tiny diamonds scattered across black velvet. At 42 years old, Jake had seen more than most humans ever would. He had served in the military for 20 years before becoming a diplomat. His face carried the lines of experience, and his dark eyes held a calm wisdom that came from surviving difficult times. The ship was heading to Prime, a massive space station that floated in neutral territory. The Peace Summit would be held there, and Jake had been chosen to represent humanity. It was an honor, but also a heavy responsibility. The decisions made at this summit could shape the future of Earth for generations to come. Lieutenant Torres knocked on his door and entered. She was young, only 28, but sharp and dedicated. Her brown hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail, and her uniform was always perfect. She served as Jake's aide and had proven herself many times over. "Commander, we will arrive at Prime in 3 hours," she said. Jake nodded without turning from the window. "How is the rest of the team?" "Dr. Cole is reviewing the cultural briefings again. He wants to make sure we do not accidentally offend anyone." Jake smiled slightly. Was their cultural advisor, a bookish man with gray hair and thick glasses. He had spent his entire life studying alien cultures and spoke 12 different languages. His knowledge had saved them from embarrassment more than once. "Good, we will need his expertise," Jake said. He finally turned to face. "The Seraphine will be there." His expression tightened. Everyone knew about the Seraphine. They were one of the oldest and most powerful races in the galaxy. Their empire stretched across thousands of star systems, and their history went back over 10,000 years. They were beautiful creatures with silver skin that seemed to glow from within. Their eyes changed colors based on their emotions, shifting from blue to purple to gold. But the Seraphine were also proud. Too proud. They believed themselves to be the most civilized beings in existence. They looked at younger races the way a king might look at peasants. Humanity, with its mere 300 years of space travel, was considered barely worth noticing. "I have heard their delegation is led by Princess," said carefully. Jake had heard the same. Princess was the youngest daughter of Emperor. She was only 19 cycles old by Seraphine counting, which made her roughly equivalent to a human teenager. Despite her youth, she was considered brilliant among her people. She had mastered advanced sciences and could speak dozens of languages. But she was also known for her sharp tongue and her absolute belief in Seraphine superiority. "We will treat her with respect," Jake said simply. "The same respect we show everyone." 3 hours later, the transport ship docked at Prime. The station was enormous, larger than any city Jake had ever seen. Its curved walls stretched for miles, and thousands of ships moved around it like bees around a hive. Lights of every color flickered from windows and signs, and the distant hum of engines filled the air. Jake led his small team through the docking bay. They wore their formal uniforms, dark blue with silver trim, the symbol of Earth's United Coalition displayed proudly on their shoulders. Other delegations moved around them, aliens of every shape and size. Some walked on 2 legs like humans. Others floated or crawled or moved in ways that easy description. Jake noticed the looks immediately, subtle glances, whispered comments. A few delegates stepped aside as the humans passed, not out of respect but out of dismissal, like they were avoiding something unpleasant. Jake kept his face neutral. He had experienced this before. It never got easier, but he had learned not to let it show. Dr. Cole walked beside him, his clutched tightly in his hands. "The opening ceremony is in 2 hours. We have been assigned quarters in the eastern section of the station." "The eastern section," repeated with a slight frown. "That is the farthest point from the main hall." "Yes," said quietly. "It seems we were not given priority placement." Jake said nothing. The message was clear. Humanity was tolerated at this summit, but not welcomed. They were allowed to attend, but they would be reminded of their place at every opportunity. Their quarters were small but clean. Jake did not complain. He had slept in far worse places during his military days. He unpacked his few belongings and reviewed the schedule for the summit. There would be debates, negotiations, formal dinners, and informal gatherings. Each event was an opportunity to build relationships and prove humanity's worth. The opening ceremony was held in the Grand Assembly Hall, a massive chamber with ceilings so high they disappeared into shadow. Thousands of delegates filled the seats, arranged by species and rank. The most powerful races sat near the center, close to the main stage. Humanity's seats were at the far edge, nearly against the wall. Jake took his place without complaint. He had learned long ago that complaining changed nothing. Action was what mattered. He would show them what humans were made of through his conduct, not his words. The Seraphine delegation entered last, as was their custom. They moved with fluid grace, their silver robes flowing behind them like liquid metal. At their head walked Princess. She was tall and slender, with silver skin that glowed softly in the light. Her hair was white as snow and fell past her shoulders in perfect waves. Her eyes were a deep violet, beautiful and cold. She scanned the crowd as she walked, her gaze passing over the various delegations. When her eyes reached the human section, she paused for just a moment. Her lips curved into the smallest of smiles, the kind that held no warmth. Then she looked away and continued to her seat at the center of the hall. Jake watched her go. He had seen that look before on the faces of many who considered themselves superior. It did not anger him. It saddened him. The universe was vast and filled with wonders, and yet so many beings chose to spend their time looking down on others instead of reaching out to learn. The ceremony began with speeches from the elder races. They spoke of peace and cooperation, of shared futures and mutual respect. But Jake noticed that the words were aimed at certain delegations and not others. Humanity was mentioned only once, briefly, as a newcomer that had shown potential. Potential. The word hung in the air like a question mark. Humanity had potential, but they had not yet proven themselves. They were being tested, watched, judged by eyes that had already decided they would fail. Jake accepted this challenge silently. He would not fail. He would not let his people down. No matter what obstacles were placed in his path, he would face them with patience and dignity. The ceremony ended and the delegates began to mingle. Jake moved through the crowd with careful steps, introducing himself to anyone who would listen. Some greeted him warmly. Others barely acknowledged his presence. A few turned away entirely. But Jake kept moving. He kept smiling. He kept trying. Because that was what humans did. They kept going, no matter how hard the road became. They had crawled out of caves and crossed oceans and reached the stars through sheer determination. A few cold looks would not stop them now. As the evening continued, Jake felt eyes on him. He turned and saw Princess watching him from across the room. Her violet eyes studied him like he was an interesting specimen, something curious but ultimately insignificant. Jake met her gaze calmly. He did not look away or bow his head. He simply acknowledged her with a polite nod, the same respect he would show anyone. The princess raised one elegant eyebrow, surprised perhaps by his composure. Then she turned back to her companions, already forgetting him. But Jake knew they would meet again, and when they did, he would be ready. 3 days had passed since the opening ceremony. The summit continued with meetings and debates that stretched from morning until late into the night. Jake attended every session, took careful notes, and spoke when given the opportunity. His words were measured and thoughtful, and slowly, some delegates began to take notice. The ambassador, A large creature with rough gray skin and 4 arms approached Jake after one particular debate. He complimented the human on his clear thinking and invited him to share a meal sometime during the summit. Jake accepted gratefully. Small victories, he reminded himself. Progress was made one step at a time. On the evening of the third day, a formal reception was held in the Crystal Pavilion. The room was spectacular, with walls made of transparent panels that showed the endless stars beyond. Tables laden with food from 100 worlds lined the edges, and soft music played from hidden speakers. Delegates moved through the space in groups, talking and laughing and forming the alliances that would shape galactic politics for years to come. Jake wore his best uniform and moved through the crowd with practiced ease. Stayed close, ready to provide information or assistance at a moment's notice. Had chosen to remain in their quarters, claiming that large social gatherings gave him headaches. Jake suspected the older man simply preferred his books to small talk. The reception was going well. Jake had managed to have pleasant conversations with several important delegates. The trade minister seemed interested in discussing commerce opportunities with Earth. A representative from the collective asked thoughtful questions about human art and music. Even a few Seraphine nobles had exchanged polite words with him, though their eyes remained distant and cold. It was near the middle of the evening when Princess approached. Jake saw her coming from across the room. She moved like water flowing downhill, smooth and inevitable. Her silver robes caught the light and scattered it into tiny rainbows. Behind her walked her personal guards, tall Seraphine warriors with blank expressions, and a small group of young nobles who watched everything with amused interest. The princess stopped directly in front of Jake. Up close, she was even more striking. Her silver skin was flawless, and her violet eyes seemed to hold ancient secrets. But there was something hard in those eyes, something sharp and unkind. "You are the human commander," she said. It was not a question. Her voice was musical but carried an edge, like a beautiful blade. A small device on her collar translated her words into perfect English. Jake nodded politely. "Commander Jake, representing Earth's United Coalition. It is an honor to meet you, Princess." The nobles behind her exchanged glances and smiled. They seemed to be expecting something entertaining. "I have been curious about your species," the princess continued. She tilted her head slightly, studying him. "You are so new to the stars. Your entire history of space travel would be a brief chapter in Seraphine records." "That is true," Jake agreed calmly. "We have much to learn." "Indeed you do." She began to circle him slowly, like a predator examining prey. "Tell me, Commander, what do humans hope to achieve at this summit? What could such a young race possibly contribute?" The question was designed to embarrass him. Jake recognized the trap immediately. If he spoke too proudly, he would seem arrogant. If he was too humble, he would confirm her belief that humans were inferior. "We hope to build friendships," Jake said simply, "to learn from those with more experience, and perhaps in time to share our own perspective." Princess laughed softly. It was not a kind sound. "Your perspective, how charming." She stopped in front of him again, her eyes locked on his. "And what perspective might that be? You have been traveling among the stars for mere centuries. We have been building empires for 10,000 years. What could humans possibly teach the Seraphine?" Jake remained calm. He had faced insults before. Every species sees the universe differently. Even a new voice can sometimes offer fresh insight. The nobles behind the princess whispered to each other, clearly enjoying the exchange. One of them said something in the Seraphine language that made the others laugh quietly. Smile grew wider and colder. Fresh insight. Yes, I suppose animals sometimes have amusing behaviors that can entertain us. The word hung in the air. Animals. She had called humans animals. Nearby conversations stopped. Delegates from other species turned to watch, their expressions ranging from shock to anticipation. Everyone wanted to see how the human would react. Jake felt the insult settle into his chest like a cold stone, but his expression did not change. His breathing remained steady. He had been insulted by experts during his military career. This young princess, for all her intelligence, was an amateur in comparison. Princess seemed to expect a reaction. When none came, she pushed harder. On my, there is a creature called it is a scavenger that mimics the sounds of more intelligent beings. It can copy words and even simple sentences, but it understands nothing. It simply repeats what it hears, hopping to receive food or attention. She paused, letting her words sink in. Humans remind me of, you copy our technology, you mimic our customs, but do you truly understand any of it? Or are you simply clever animals performing tricks? The silence in the surrounding area was absolute. Even the music seemed to fade. Every eye was on Jake, waiting for his response. Would he argue? Would he shout? Would he storm away in anger? The nobles were grinning now, delighted by the spectacle. Jake looked at Princess for a long moment. He saw her youth, her arrogance, her desperate need to prove herself superior. He saw a child who had been told her entire life that she was better than everyone else and had never had reason to question it. He felt many things in that moment. Anger, yes, but also sadness, disappointment, and a strange kind of pity for someone so brilliant who understood so little about what truly mattered. When Jake finally responded, it was not with words. He simply looked at her with calm, steady eyes. His expression held no anger, no humiliation, no wounded pride. Instead, there was something else. Something the princess had never seen directed at her before. Disappointment, deep, genuine disappointment. The kind a teacher might show a student who had failed a simple test. The kind a parent might show a child who had done something shameful. Without saying a single word, Commander Jake turned and walked away. He did not storm off in anger. He did not make a scene. He simply turned his back on the princess of the Seraphine Empire and walked away calmly, as if she were no longer worth his attention. As if she had revealed herself to be exactly what he feared she was, and there was nothing more to be said. The effect was devastating. Princess stood frozen in place. Her mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. She had prepared responses for anger. She had expected arguments, denials, perhaps even tears. But this quiet dismissal, this silent rejection. She had never experienced anything like it. The nobles behind her stopped laughing. They exchanged confused glances, unsure what to make of what had just happened. The guards remained motionless, waiting for orders that did not come. Around the room, delegates watched the human commander walk away with measured steps. He did not look back. He did not hesitate. He moved through the crowd with perfect composure and disappeared through a far doorway. Tors followed him, her expression carefully neutral, though inside she was burning with pride for her commander. The whispers began almost immediately. "Did you see that? He just walked away. He did not even respond. The princess insulted him directly and he simply left. What does it mean? Is that a human custom? How extraordinary." Princess remained where she stood, surrounded by her silent companions. Her violet eyes stared at the doorway where Jake had vanished. Her hands, hidden in her sleeves, trembled slightly. She had wanted to humiliate the human. She had wanted to prove human inferiority in front of everyone. Instead, something had happened that she did not understand. Something that made her feel small and foolish and strangely empty. The human had not defended himself. He had not fought back. He had simply looked at her with those calm, sad eyes and walked away. And somehow, that was worse than any argument could have been. The reception continued around her, but no longer felt like celebrating. She excused herself shortly after and returned to her quarters, claiming she was tired. But she did not sleep that night. She kept seeing those eyes, that look of quiet disappointment, that turned back walking away into the crowd. And for the first time in her privileged life, Princess of the Seraphine Empire began to wonder if perhaps she had made a terrible mistake. News traveled fast on Prime. By the next morning, everyone at the summit had heard about the incident at the Crystal Pavilion. The story was told and retold in corridors and meeting rooms, each version adding new details or interpretations. But the core remained the same. The human commander had been publicly insulted by Princess, and he had responded by simply walking away without a word. For most species, this would have been seen as weakness, a retreat, a surrender, but something about the way the human had done it changed the meaning entirely. Witnesses described his calm expression, his steady eyes, the complete absence of fear or anger. He had not fled in shame. He had dismissed the princess as if she were not worth arguing with. Among the Seraphine, this was almost unthinkable. In Seraphine culture, status was everything. To be acknowledged, even in anger, meant you mattered. Enemies who shouted at you were still paying attention to you, but to be ignored, to be treated as if you were not even worth a response, that was perhaps the greatest insult their society could imagine. Princess discovered this truth in the worst possible way. She woke the morning after the reception to find subtle changes in how others treated her. The elder Seraphine diplomats who had always shown her respect now looked at her with something that might have been disappointment. Her companions from the night before seemed embarrassed, reluctant to meet her eyes. Even her personal guard seemed different, though they would never say anything openly. The other delegations were even worse. The ambassador, who had previously ignored humanity entirely, now spoke warmly of Commander at a morning meeting. He praised the humans' composure and wisdom. Several other representatives nodded in agreement. No one mentioned the princess by name, but the implication was clear. Sat through that meeting feeling eyes on her, judging her, finding her lacking. She had wanted to humiliate the human. Instead, she had humiliated herself. In her private quarters, she contacted her father through a secure channel. Emperor appeared on the screen, his silver face impassive but his golden eyes hard with displeasure. "I have heard what happened," he said without greeting. His voice was cold. "Father, I was simply making conversation." The human overreacted. Did he? The Emperor's tone made clear he did not believe this. From what I understand, the human did not react at all. That is the problem. Felt her cheeks warm with shame. He was rude to leave without responding. Was he? Or was he simply choosing not to engage with childish behavior? Her father paused, letting the words sink in. "I sent you to this summit to represent our empire, to build relationships that would benefit our people. Instead, you have made us look like petty fools who attack those weaker than ourselves." "Humans are beneath us," said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Perhaps, but that does not mean we should say so to their faces." The Emperor leaned forward slightly. "The humans control 3 critical jump points that we need for our new trade routes. Their friendship has value, whether you like it or not. And you have damaged that friendship with your thoughtless words." The connection ended without a farewell. Sat alone in her quarters, the weight of her father's disappointment pressing down on her shoulders. She had never failed him before. She had always been the brilliant daughter, the pride of the imperial family. Now she felt like something much smaller. Across the station, Jake went about his business as if nothing had happened. He attended meetings, had conversations, and continued building the relationships that Earth needed. When other delegates mentioned the incident, he simply smiled and changed the subject. He did not complain about the princess. He did not demand an apology. He acted as if it had been a minor inconvenience, barely worth remembering. This made everything worse for her. If he had been angry, she could have justified her actions. Clearly, humans were emotional and unstable. If he had complained to the summit organizers, she could have painted him as weak and petty. But his quiet dignity, his simple refusal to engage with her cruelty, left her with no defense. She began watching him from across rooms. She noticed how he treated everyone with the same calm respect, regardless of their species or status. She saw him talking with a server, asking questions about there with genuine interest. She watched him help an elderly delegate find their seat, offering his arm for support. Small kindnesses that cost him nothing but seemed to come naturally. Who was this human? What made him so different from what she had expected? On the third day after the incident, found herself in the station's archives. She told herself she was simply passing time, but her fingers pulled up records on humanity and she began to read. What she found surprised her. Humanity's history was indeed short by galactic standards, but it was also remarkable. They had evolved on a harsh world with extreme temperatures and dangerous predators. They had nearly destroyed themselves multiple times through wars and environmental damage, but each time they had pulled back from the edge. They had rebuilt. They had learned. She read about their ancient civilizations, their art and music, their poetry and philosophy. She found translations of human literature and discovered stories that moved her in unexpected ways. Tales of love and sacrifice, of courage in the face of impossible odds, of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. One passage in particular caught her attention. It was from a human philosopher who had lived centuries ago. He had written about dignity, about the inherent worth that existed in every person regardless of their birth or status. He argued that true civilization was not measured by technology or power, but by how a society treated its weakest members. Read those words several times. They seemed so simple, yet they challenged everything she had been taught. She also learned about human resilience. Their bodies were fragile compared to many species, yet they had spread across dozens of star systems. They faced setbacks with determination rather than despair. When they failed, they tried again, and again, and again, until they succeeded. There was something almost inspiring about it. She thought about the commander and his calm eyes. He had not defended humanity because he did not need to. Their worth was not determined by what others thought of them. They knew who they were. They knew what they had overcome. The opinions of one arrogant princess meant nothing in the face of that knowledge. Began to understand why her insults had failed. She had tried to hurt Jake by questioning humanity's value, but he had never based his self-worth on her approval. He did not need her acknowledgement to feel significant. His dignity came from within. It was a strange concept for a Seraphine princess. Her entire life, she had measured herself by how others saw her, by her status, her titles, her bloodline. She had never considered that worth could exist independently of external validation. The more she thought about it, the smaller she felt. Not because humans were greater than the Seraphine, but because she had revealed something ugly about herself. She had attacked someone for no reason other than to feel superior. She had used her position and power to belittle a person who had done nothing to deserve it. What did that say about her? Her companions noticed the change. She became quieter, more withdrawn. She stopped making comments about lesser species. She asked questions instead of making pronouncements. They did not understand what was happening, but they sensed that something fundamental had shifted. On the fifth day, made a decision. She would speak to Commander, not to argue or defend herself, but to apologize, truly apologize. It was something she had rarely done in her life, and the thought terrified her. But she knew it was necessary. Not for political reasons, not to please her father, but because it was right. She sent a formal request for a private meeting. The response came back within an hour. The commander would see her, but he had prior commitments. She would need to wait. So she waited. For 2 hours, she sat in a small room outside his office, doing something she had never done before, being patient on someone else's schedule, experiencing what it felt like to be less important. It was uncomfortable, humbling, but somehow it also felt deserved. When she was finally called in, she found the commander sitting at a simple desk, a cup of something warm beside him. He looked up and nodded politely, gesturing for her to sit. His manner was professional, nothing more. Took a deep breath. She had prepared a formal apology in the traditional Seraphine style, full of elaborate phrases and ritualistic acknowledgments. But looking at his calm, patient face, she set all of that aside. She would speak simply, honestly, the way humans seem to speak to each other. It was time to tell the truth. The office was small and plain. There were no decorations on the walls, no displays of achievement or status, just a desk, 2 chairs, and a window that looked out at the stars. For someone representing an entire planet, Commander Jake seemed remarkably uninterested in showing off. Sat across from him, her hands folded in her lap. She had spent hours preparing what to say, but now that she was here, all her carefully chosen words seemed inadequate. Jake waited patiently. He did not rush her or fill the silence with small talk. He simply sat with his cup of warm liquid, giving her space to find her voice. Finally, she spoke. "I was wrong," she said. The words felt strange in her mouth. She could not remember the last time she had said them. "What I said at the reception was cruel and unfair. You did nothing to deserve such treatment." Jake watched her with those calm eyes. He did not interrupt. "I was taught my whole life that the Seraphine are superior to all other races," continued. Her voice was steady, but it cost her effort to keep it so. "I never questioned this belief. Why would I? Everything around me confirmed it. Our technology, our history, our power. We are the oldest and most advanced civilization in this region of the galaxy." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "But these past few days I have been thinking. I have been reading about your species, and I have been watching you." She met his eyes directly. "You have every right to be angry with me. I publicly humiliated you in front of dozens of delegates. I called your people animals. I compared you to mindless scavengers. Any other being would have responded with fury or demands for apology. But you did not," she said softly. "You simply looked at me and walked away. And somehow that was worse than any argument. That silence has followed me everywhere. It has made me question everything I thought I knew." Jake set down his cup. When he spoke, his voice was gentle but firm. "May I tell you what I saw that night?" Nodded. "I saw a young woman trying very hard to prove something. To herself, to her companions, maybe to the galaxy itself. I saw someone who had been told her entire life that she was better than everyone else, and who had never been given a reason to doubt it." He paused. "I also saw someone who was afraid." Afraid, the word surprised her. Yes, afraid that perhaps it was not true. Afraid that maybe worth cannot be measured by age or technology or power. Afraid that if she stopped looking down on others, she might have to look honestly at herself. The words cut deep but did not look away. She had asked for honesty and she was receiving it. "I walked away because arguing would have changed nothing," Jake continued. "You were not interested in understanding. You wanted to win. And I have learned that some battles are not worth fighting. Some people need to find their own truth in their own time. But you could have defended your species. You could have pointed out our achievements, our resilience, our potential." Jake smiled slightly. It was the first real warmth she had seen from him. "Why? Would you have listened? Would any of those words have mattered to someone who had already decided we were worthless?" Had no answer. "Our worth is not determined by what others think of us," Jake said. "Humanity learned this lesson long ago through centuries of hardship. We have been underestimated and dismissed and written off more times than I can count. By nature, by circumstance, by other species. And yet here we are, still standing, still growing, still reaching for the stars." He leaned forward slightly. "My grandfather used to say something that I have never forgotten. He said that the measure of a person is not how they treat their equals, but how they treat those they believe to be beneath them." Felt those words settle into her heart like stones dropping into still water. "When you spoke to me that night, you revealed something about yourself," Jake continued. "Not about humanity, about you. You showed everyone watching exactly what kind of person you were, someone who would use her power and status to belittle those who could not fight back. Is that who you want to be?" The question hung in the air between them. Felt tears building behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She was a princess of the Seraphine Empire. She did not cry. "No," she whispered, "that is not who I want to be." Jake nodded slowly. Then perhaps this experience has value after all. They sat in silence for a moment. Outside the window, stars drifted past in their eternal dance. "I have read about your history," said eventually. "Your species has survived so much. Wars that killed millions, diseases that wiped out whole populations, environmental disasters that threatened your entire planet. And yet you persisted, you rebuilt, you kept going." "Yes," Jake agreed, "that is what we do." "Why?" The question was genuine. "Why keep fighting when everything seems hopeless?" Jake considered the question carefully. "Because hope is a choice, not a feeling. We choose to believe that tomorrow can be better than today. We choose to work toward a future we might never see. We choose to plant trees whose shade we will never sit in." "That seems irrational." "Maybe, but it works." Jake smiled again. "Rationality is not always the best guide. Sometimes the most important things in life make no logical sense. Love, sacrifice, forgiveness. These things do not compute in any equation, yet they are what make existence worthwhile." Thought about her own culture. The Seraphine prized logic and reason above all else. Emotions were considered weaknesses to be controlled. She had been taught to analyze everything, to calculate every advantage, to never act without careful consideration. But where had that led her? To a moment of cruelty that served no purpose except to satisfy her own ego. "I have spent my whole life measuring worth by power and achievement," she said quietly. "I never considered that kindness could be a kind of strength, that dignity could exist independently of status." "It takes time to unlearn old lessons," Jake said, "especially lessons we were taught as children. But the fact that you are here, saying these things, tells me you have already begun." He reached into his desk and pulled out something small. It was a book, bound in worn leather. Physical books were rare in the modern age, almost antiques. "This belonged to my grandfather," Jake said. "It is a collection of human poetry and philosophy, some of the greatest thoughts our species has ever produced." He held it out to her. "I would like you to have it." Hesitated. "I cannot accept this. It is too valuable." "Things are only valuable if they are used. This book has been sitting in my drawer for years. I think it might do more good in your hands." He pressed it gently toward her. "Consider it an investment. Perhaps these words will help you become the leader your people deserve." She took the book carefully, running her fingers over the worn cover. It was surprisingly heavy for its size. "I do not understand you," she admitted. "I insulted you publicly. I called your species animals. And now you give me a family treasure and speak to me like a teacher guiding a student." "You apologized," Jake said simply. "Genuinely apologized without excuses or justifications. Do you know how rare that is? Most people would rather die than admit they were wrong. The fact that you came here, sat in that waiting room, and spoke honestly to me shows more growth than many people achieve in their entire lives." "Everyone deserves a second chance," he continued. "And sometimes, showing kindness to someone who hurt you is the most powerful thing you can do, not because they deserve it, but because it is the right thing to do." Looked at the book in her hands, then back at the human sitting across from her. She had come to this meeting expecting to deliver an apology and leave. Instead, she had received something far more valuable. A lesson, a gift, and perhaps the beginning of an understanding that would change everything. "Thank you," she said. The words were inadequate, but they were all she had. "You are welcome," Jake replied. "Now, I believe there is still much work to be done at this summit. Perhaps you would like to join me for a meeting this afternoon. The ambassador has some interesting proposals regarding trade routes." It was an offer of peace. A hand extended across the divide she had created, recognized it for what it was, and accepted gratefully. "I would be honored," she said. As she left his office, the book clutched carefully against her chest, felt something she had not experienced in a very long time. Hope. Not the cold hope of political calculation or the desperate hope of ambition, but something warmer, something that suggested the future might hold possibilities she had never imagined. She had come to this summit as a princess of the greatest empire in the galaxy. She was leaving this meeting as something else entirely. A student ready to learn. The final days of the summit passed in a blur of negotiations and agreements. Delegates who had arrived as strangers left as partners. Trade deals were signed. Alliance treaties were drafted. The future of dozens of star systems was shaped by words spoken in quiet meeting rooms. But the most remarkable change was something few had expected. Princess of the Seraphine Empire began working alongside Commander Jake. At first, the other delegates watched with confusion. Had they not witnessed her public insult just days earlier? Had the human not walked away from her in silence? Yet here they were, sitting side by side at negotiation tables, exchanging notes and speaking with obvious mutual respect. The rumors spread quickly. Some said the princess had been ordered by her father to make amends. Others claimed the human had demanded an apology and received one. A few suggested there was something romantic developing between them, though anyone who watched them closely could see that was not the case. What they had was something different, something that might prove more valuable than romance. They had understanding. Proved to be a capable negotiator when she set aside her arrogance. Her intelligence, which she had previously used to belittle others, became a tool for finding common ground between opposing parties. She asked questions instead of making demands. She listened more than she spoke. The elder Seraphine diplomats watched with growing approval. Jake noticed the changes and encouraged them quietly. He gave her opportunities to contribute without making it seem like charity. He treated her mistakes as learning moments rather than failures. When she slipped back into old patterns of superiority, a simple look from him was enough to remind her of who she wanted to become. The landmark achievement of the summit came on the final day. The Seraphine Empire and Earth's United Coalition signed a comprehensive trade agreement that would benefit both civilizations for generations. The deal secured human access to advanced Seraphine medical technology in exchange for rights to use human-controlled jump points. It was a fair arrangement that treated both parties as equals. The signing ceremony was held in the Grand Assembly Hall, the same room where the summit had begun. Princess represented the Seraphine Empire, having personally requested the honor from her father. Commander Jake signed for humanity. When their hands met to shake after the final signature, cameras captured the moment for history. But the most meaningful exchange happened away from the cameras. On the evening before the delegations departed, found Jake on an observation deck, watching the stars in solitude. She approached quietly and stood beside him without speaking. They remained that way for several minutes, comfortable in each other's silence. "I read the book," she finally said, "3 times now." Jake smiled without looking away from the stars. "And what did you think?" "It is beautiful, painful, confusing, inspiring." She paused. "Human." "That sounds about right." There is a poem near the end, about a road that divides in a forest. The speaker chooses the path less traveled and says it made all the difference. Turn to face him. "I think I understand now. You showed me a different path, one I would never have found on my own." "You found it yourself," Jake said. "I just stood in the right place at the right time." "No, you did more than that. You showed me what dignity looks like when it is not tied to status or power. You demonstrated that strength can be quiet, that kindness is not weakness." She took a breath. "You taught me that the measure of a person is how they treat those they consider beneath them." "You remembered." "I will never forget." They stood together in silence for another moment. Outside the window, a ship passed by, its lights blinking against the endless dark. "What will you do now?" Jake asked. "Return home, continue my studies, try to become worthy of the responsibilities I was born into," she smiled slightly. "It will not be easy. Many in my court will not understand the changes in me. They will think I have grown weak." "And what will you tell them?" "The truth, that I met a human who taught me more about true strength in 1 week than I learned in 19 years of royal education." She looked at him directly. "They will not believe me at first, but eventually I will prove it through my actions." Jake nodded. "That is all any of us can do. Prove who we are through what we do, not what we say." Reached into her robes and pulled out a small object. It was a crystal, perfectly clear, that seemed to glow with inner light. She held it out to him. "This is a memory stone. It is a traditional gift among my people given to those who have changed our lives. When you hold it, you will see moments from my perspective. The night of the reception, the days that followed, my journey to understanding." She pressed it into his hand. "I want you to know that your silence was not ignored. It echoed through my soul until I finally understood its meaning." Jake accepted the gift with quiet gratitude. He held it up to the light and saw flashes of color dance within its depths. "Thank you," he said simply. "No, thank you," straightened her shoulders, standing tall with a new kind of confidence. "When I become Empress, I will remember this summit. I will remember you, and I will work every day to make my empire worthy of friendship with humanity." "I believe you will." They shook hands one final time, not as diplomat and princess, but as two individuals who had found unexpected common ground across the vast divide of species and culture. The next morning, the delegations departed Prime. Ships scattered to their distant homes, carrying the agreements and alliances formed during those historic days. Most delegates quickly forgot the personal dramas that had unfolded, focused on the political implications of the summit. But some remembered, and they told the story to others. The story of a human who was publicly insulted by an alien princess, and who responded not with anger or argument but with quiet dignity, who simply turned and walked away, leaving his attacker standing in stunned silence, and who, through that simple act, taught one of the most powerful beings in the galaxy a lesson she would carry for the rest of her life. Years passed, decades. The galaxy continued to turn. Princess became Empress, ruling the Seraphine Empire with wisdom and compassion that surprised many who had known her in her youth. Under her leadership, the empire transformed. It became less rigid, more open to other species, more willing to see worth in those it had once considered inferior. She kept the book Jake had given her in her private chambers. It was worn now, its pages soft from countless readings. She often opened it when facing difficult decisions, seeking guidance from the words of human poets and philosophers who had lived and died centuries before she was born. The alliance between humanity and the Seraphine Empire grew stronger with each passing year. Trade flourished. Cultural exchanges brought their peoples closer together. When threats arose that endangered them both, they faced those challenges side by side. Whenever diplomats or historians asked Empress about the dramatic change in Seraphine attitudes toward humanity, she would tell them a story about a young princess who was cruel and arrogant, about a human commander who had every right to be angry but chose dignity instead, about a moment of silence that spoke louder than any words. She would describe how he turned and left her standing there, and how that silence had echoed through her soul until she finally understood what it meant to be truly civilized. The humans, she would say with a smile, were never the primitives. They had simply been waiting for the rest of the galaxy to grow up. And in that growing, in that reaching toward something better than what they had been, lay the true measure of all civilizations. Not how powerful they became, not how long they endured, but how they treated others when they had the power to be cruel. That was the lesson a human taught a princess. That was the wisdom a commander shared through silence. and that was the truth that would echo through the galaxy for generations to come. The end